Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Today we're going to look at our fourth lecture, Writing the Literature. In the last video lecture, we have seen why a literature review is important. Almost all research topics have been studied by other researchers. So, as you consider some problem or research issue, you can be almost assured that somebody else has studied the problem previously. Therefore, the more you know about what was studied earlier, the better you can approach and solve your research problem. In this video, we will see more on how to write the literature review. Like any other academic text, the basic structure of the literature review chapter must contain three components: an introduction, the main body of the review, and a concluding remark. We will look at each one of these components in more detail in the subsequent slides. But before that, recall in the last video lecture, you begin your literature review by searching for literature, and then do a critical reading of those research articles. So, how do you begin to write the literature review? Before you can begin writing, you need to organize all that you have read, and at the same time, do a synthesis of your readings. Synthesis is an important part of academic writing, but it can become overwhelming and difficult to keep resources organized. One way to organize your readings is by using the synthesis matrix. The synthesis matrix is a chart that allows the researcher to sort and categorize the main points of each article, as well as the different arguments presented on an issue. When completed, it provides a visual representation of main ideas found in the literature, and also shows where there is overlap in ideas between authors. A completed matrix will help to integrate all of the different resources together, which will facilitate the synthesis of information on a specific topic. By using the synthesis matrix, all of the key information will be saved in one place. Having this organized document will help you during the outlining and writing phases of your literature review. A synthesis matrix can take many different forms. One way is to label the sources across the top of your chart. You can do this by using the author's last name or any other identifier. Then, label the sides of the chart with the main ideas that your sources discuss related to your topic. As you examine your first source, you work vertically in the column belonging to that source and record as much information as possible about each main idea presented in the work. Keep following this similar pattern for the next sources. If you find information that relates to a main point that was already identified, you simply put it in the pertaining row. But you will probably find new main ideas under each new source, so that you need to add on to your list. After your chart is complete, notice patterns of information. You may find that your sources at times discuss very similar materials, or that they sometimes deal with completely different aspects of your topic. These patterns can be useful in creating a thesis statement that can guide your writing and keep you focused as you begin your draft. The empty spaces on your chart could provide clues about the gaps in the current state of knowledge on your topic. Here is an example of a synthesis matrix that organizes literature by main ideas. The topic is on women in World War II. As you can see, there are 4 papers or sources involved. Each source is identified by the author's last name, and each paper talks about the same or similar main ideas. When you read the articles, you summarize the key points of those main ideas for each paper and write them down in the relevant cells. If no argument was made on a particular main idea, you just leave it empty. Here is another way to do a synthesis matrix. This method is also known as a summary table. You begin by labeling the row across the top of your table with several key information, such as the author's names, objectives of the paper, the sample information, model or technique adopted, and main findings. As you read each source, you summarize and make notes in the appropriate column about the information discussed in the paper. This is an example of synthesis matrix using the summary approach. As you can see, each paper is organized by the different headings. Using this method, you can compare and contrast multiple aspects of the papers, such as findings or methods used. Alternatively, here are other examples of a synthesis matrix. Once you have summarized and synthesized your literature, you can begin writing your literature review. There are a number of different approaches to organizing your review. The most popular approaches are doing it chronologically, thematically, or methodologically. A chronological literature review is the simplest approach, where we trace the development of the topic over time. That is, we write a review according to when the literatures were published. However, it is best to avoid simply listing and summarizing sources in order. Instead, try to analyze the patterns, turning points, and key debates that have shaped the direction of the field. Give your own interpretation of how and why certain developments occurred. A thematic or by theme literature review organizes your review into subsections that address different aspects or themes of the topic. A review in this manner would shift between time periods within each section according to the points made. For example, if you are reviewing a literature about inequalities in migrant health outcomes, so the key themes might include health care policy, language barriers, cultural attitudes, legal status, and economic access. A methodological literature review focuses on the methods of the researcher. If you draw your sources from different disciplines or fields that use a variety of research methods, you might want to compare the results and conclusions that emerge from different approaches. For example, you can look at what results have emerged in qualitative versus quantitative research, or discuss how the topic has been approached by empirical versus theoretical scholarship, or divide the literature into sociological, historical, and cultural sources. There are, of course, other ways to organize your literature review, such as the following. A contrasting school of thought organizes the review according to the different schools of thought. For example, if you find a dominant argument comes up in your research, with researchers taking two sides and talking about how the other is wrong, you may want to group your literature review by those schools of thought and contrast the differences in their approaches and ideas. A problem-cause solution organizes the review so that it moves from the problem to the solution. A general to specific order, or also called the funnel approach, examines broad-based research first, and then focus on specific studies that relate to the topic. A specific to general order tries to discuss specific research studies so conclusions can be drawn. A known to unknown order examines the current literature about the problem and then identify at the end what is still not known. A comparison and contrast order shows how research studies are similar to and different from each other. Here is an example of a literature review organized by theme. Here is another example of a literature review, but this time organized by theme and location. And here is an example of a literature review using the methodological approach. Now we will look at the three basic components of a literature review in more detail. As mentioned before, there are three parts to a literature review chapter: the introduction, the main body, which consists of paragraphs, and concluding remarks. The introduction part of a literature review must tell the reader what you're going to cover in the review, the scope of your research, and how the review ties in with your own research topic. Specifically, the introduction should clearly establish your research topic, what it is about, and why it is significant and worthwhile. Reiterate your central problem or research question and give an overview of the scholarly contents. You can emphasize on the timeliness of your topic as well. For instance, you can write, "Many recent studies have focused on the problem of X." Or you can highlight a gap in the literature. For instance, while there has been much research on X, few researchers have taken Y into consideration. The last paragraph of your introduction must detail the structure of what follows, that is, the main body or an overview of the literature review contents. Here are five main components of an introduction that you may find useful. 1. To announce the topic of your literature review. What this means is a clear and a concise statement of your problem. 2. To state the purpose of your literature review. In other words, a careful explanation of what you aim to achieve. 3. To explain the relevance of the topic. which is an indication of your topic's importance in the literature. 4. To establish your credibility. That is, you want to give some information to your readers as to why you should be competent to write about this topic. And 5. To preview the main points. That is, to give an advance notice of the structure of your entire literature review contents. This is an example of an introduction. First, there's a topic sentence, as highlighted in blue, that indicates what will be covered in the literature review. In this case, the student identifies 5 major themes on what motivates human behavior. Then the student proceeds with identifying those 5 major themes, or scope of her research, as highlighted in orange. And thirdly, there's also a concluding sentence that tells the reader the specific focus of the literature review that ties in with her own research topic, as highlighted in purple. Here is another example. Can you identify the 3 parts of an introduction here? After the introduction, you will have the main body, which is the bulk of your literature review. When writing this part, you can organize your literature review into common themes that you want to convey to your readers. Or you can present it chronologically or methodologically, as what was discussed in the previous slides. In the body of review, you should not simply compile abstracts or list the summaries of past studies. Instead, you can summarize and synthesize, that is, give an overview of the main points of each source and combine them into a new coherent whole. Or you can also analyze and interpret, that is, don't just paraphrase other researchers. Instead, add your own interpretations where possible and discuss the significance of the findings in relation to the literature as a whole. When writing, you can make an outline of your literature review. For instance, if there is a major controversy, describe and explain it. Or if there are 3 methodologies used to address a question, briefly describe them and compare the results obtained by the 3 methods. Besides that, you may compare and evaluate past studies and discuss the implications of the studies and how you intend to address them. The main body comprises many paragraphs. A paragraph is a group of connected sentences that develop a single point, argument, or idea. Paragraphs need to link to one another so that your overall arguments or ideas developed are part of a coherent whole rather than separate bits. Each paragraph should include a main statement or idea that you are putting forward, that is, a topic sentence. It should also include evidence from research to support or argue your idea, showing where the writers agree and disagree. It should also include your own analysis of the research literature where appropriate, and also a summing up and linking to the next paragraph or idea. Besides linking the paragraphs to one another, you will also need to do 2 other things when writing your literature review. 1, you need to integrate all of your readings into the paragraphs. And 2, you will need to integrate your own analysis of the readings where necessary. To develop an integrated argument from multiple sources, you need to link your arguments together. It is also important to integrate your own student analysis and interpretation of the literature in your literature review. Student analysis is not just your opinion. It needs to be supported by the literature. Here is an example of integration of multiple sources into one paragraph. As you can see, you begin with a topic sentence, which outlines your main point, followed by supporting evidence from readings, as well as contrasting theories also from other people's research. Then you end with a concluding sentence, which links to the next paragraph. And here is an example of integration of student analysis in a paragraph. As always, you begin with a topic sentence, which outlines your main point, followed by the first statement of evidence from the literature. If it's available, you add on a second statement of evidence from the literature, and then you provide your own student analysis. And you conclude the paragraph with a concluding statement. After writing pages of literature review, it's a good idea to have a summary or a concluding remark on what you have read or written. The concluding remarks is where you summarize the important aspects of the existing body of literature, or what you have learned from reviewing the literature and where the research would lead to. Your review should convince your readers that your proposed research will play a necessary role in furthering knowledge in your field. The concluding remarks should also evaluate the current state of the literature that were reviewed and identify significant gaps in existing knowledge. From here, you can mention the need to establish more research, especially if you want to provide a deeper understanding of the topic and if there are inconsistencies or conflicting point of views on the subject matter. Subsequently, you can provide an outline of potential research areas for future study. And last but not least, find a way to link your research to the existing knowledge. An example of a concluding remark is given on your right. Say you have multiple themes in your literature review. You can have one paragraph of concluding remarks for each theme. Ask yourself these questions. What is the common finding? Is there any inconsistencies or conflicting point of views? And is there any significant gaps in the research or literature? Here is an example of the concluding remarks. And here's another example of a concluding remarks. Here's a friendly reminder on what makes a good literature review. A good literature review should integrate the research of various authors. It should show similarities and differences, or comparing and contrasting of ideas. It should show wide reading, as well as analysis and critical evaluation of what you have read. Let's take a look at the example on the right. As you can see, the student showed his or her ability to connect two authors' ideas, after which the student gave his or her own analysis and supported it with further evidence from literature. To summarize, a good literature review should be organized into sections that present themes and relate to your research question, should synthesize results into a summary of what is and what is not known, should identify areas of controversy in the literature, should formulate questions that need further research, should show an awareness of the theories and values that underpin the research, and should refer to bibliography in the dissertation. When writing your literature review, you are required to reference your sources as evidence of your academic integrity. Failing to cite your sources is plagiarism. Referencing is very important when you are paraphrasing and summarizing the ideas, words, or works of others, or when you are quoting directly from a source. You must follow the guides of the university on the required method of referencing. However, most commonly used referencing method is the APA, or the American Psychological Association format. Whichever method that you use, you must be consistent. Now we will look at some guidelines on how to write your literature review. 1. Have a plan. 2. Emphasize relatedness. 3. Give credit where credit is due. 4. Review the literature. Do not reproduce it. 5. Summarize what you have said. 6. Remember that your first draft will almost certainly not be your last draft. And 7. Legitimacy and academic style. Number 1. Have a plan. Writing a literature review takes planning and organization. This effort requires thought, structure, and coherence. What that means is you need to be able to connect your points logically, clearly, and easy for readers to understand. You should outline what you plan to say before you begin writing your literature review. Your research problem should suggest relevant areas for discussion and indicate the direction of your review. One example of a plan is to begin discussion from a comprehensive perspective, or also known as the inverted pyramid. That is, by discussing the issue broadly at first, and then deal with more specific ideas and studies that focus more on your own particular problem. Number 2 is to emphasize relatedness. Besides planning, you need to always be mindful of your research problem and how previous works relate to the problem you're focusing on. Throughout your writing, you need to keep your reader constantly aware of how the literature you're discussing is related to your research problem. Point out precisely what the relationship is. Whenever you cite a study, explain clearly how it relates to your own research problem. Make yourself accountable for what you say. Literature reviews should never be a chain of isolated summaries of the writings of others. The worst form of discussion would be merely listing out what others have done in the past, like Ahmad said this and Idris did that. You must always demonstrate the relatedness of the literature to the problem being researched. Here are several recommended tips to emphasize relatedness. 1. Write your research problem prominently at the top of the page, because at this location it will be a constant reminder to you of the central axis around which everything else revolves. 2. Divide the issues by numbering its various subparts. 3. Gather all citations that refer to a particular aspect of the problem so that you have as many groups as you have subdivisions of your main problem. And 4. Write the review. Head each section with words containing the identical words found in the statement of the problem. Number 3 is to give credit where credit is due. In writing the literature review, you need to always credit those authors whose ideas you are using or whose research results you are reporting. There are several ways to do this. 1. You can use footnotes. 2. You can write citations in parentheses in the text itself. 3. You can have direct quotation for a phrase or sentence. And 4. You can have it in an indented passage. Number 4 is to review the literature and not to reproduce it. Remember that what you are doing is a review of the literature. This means that you are presenting your own discussion of existing literature, not simply quoting long passages or cite at length the words or ideas of others. Because of this, it is best to avoid direct quotations. Instead, paraphrasing or restating it in your own words is the best way to do it. You should always emphasize how a particular idea or research findings relate to your own problem. In other words, what you're doing is evaluating prior work to shed light on your own study. How? You can critically analyze the relevant literature in relation to your own research questions, or state the contents of the literature, the implications of this knowledge, any gaps or deficiencies, any inconsistencies or conflicting viewpoints. Remember that you are accountable for what you write. Here are some advice. Present your own discussion. Make your own interpretations and write a critical and evaluative review. Choose words and ways of putting together that convey your understanding directly. Paraphrase. Use short, direct quotations if necessary. Long quotations are a last resort. Use them only for a good reason, such as when the specific words that an author uses are as important as the ideas that the author presents. Use evidence and be selective. Number 5 is to summarize what you have said. Every discussion of related literature should end with a brief summary section or a concluding remarks and sets forth its significance in terms of the research problem. The heading Summary should condense your review into a synopsis of how the existing literature on your topic contributes to an understanding of the specific problem you're trying to solve. Number 6 is to know that your first draft is not your final draft. You should expect to write multiple drafts of your literature review. In fact, writing the first draft will help you identify parts of the literature that are still unclear to you and places where you may need additional information or references. Even when you have obtained all of the information you need for a complete literature review, you will typically not be able to express your thoughts with complete clarity the first time around. Check the flow of your arguments for coherence. Revise, revise, revise. And finally, number 7, legitimacy and academic style. You need to be aware that academic writing is very different from regular writing. You need to use the works of other people in a way that is balanced, fair, and legal. Be sure to cite sources correctly and not infringe any copyrights. Some things to avoid are the following: falsification, or misrepresenting the work of others; fabrication, or presenting speculations as if they were facts; sloppiness, not providing correct citations; nepotism, or citing references of colleagues that are not directly related to your work; and plagiarism, the act of knowingly using other people's work and passing it off as your own.